There is a law that governs the universe, as sure and as immutable as the law of gravity. It is the law of mind. It states simply this: you build your own world. We often look at our lives, at our bank accounts, our relationships, our health, and we think these are fixed, hard facts, imposed upon us by a cruel fate or a chaotic world. But the student of truth knows better. The student of truth knows that the outer world is merely the screen upon which the soul projects its own belief. If you are standing in the ruins of a broken life today, I have good news for you. The ruin is not real. It is a shadow. And a shadow, no matter how terrifying, cannot hurt you. It can only be dispelled by light. This is the story of Fernando. But in truth, it is the story of every man and every woman who has ever forgotten who they are. It is the story of the awakening from the dream of lack into the reality of substance. Let us look at the condition. To the human eye, Fernando was finished. 3 years prior he was a builder of homes, a man of respect. Now he was a builder of nothing but anxiety. His company had collapsed under the weight of economic shifts, leaving him with a debt of $200,000, a mountain of obligation that cast a long, dark shadow over his existence. His wife, Guadalupe, unable to bear the constant terror of the ringing phone and the knocking at the door, had taken the children and left. She did not leave out of malice, she left out of fear. Fear is the great separator. It separates man from wife, and it separates man from God. So here sits Fernando. The phone rings. It is the 10th time this morning. He does not answer. He closes his eyes, wishing the world would dissolve. But the world does not dissolve by wishing. It dissolves only by rising above it. In the midst of this wreckage, the long arm of God reached out. Among the boxes of a life packed away, Fernando's hand found a book. It was an old copy of the Sermon on the Mount. It had belonged to his mother. She was a woman who did not understand high finance, but she understood the high cost of negative thinking. She used to tell him, "Fernando, if you lose your money, you have lost nothing. If you lose your faith, you have lost everything." He opened the book. He was not looking for theology, he was looking for a lifeline. He was drowning in the ocean of mass mind, the collective belief in poverty and failure. And there on the page, a sentence leaped out at him. It was a sentence that contained the secret of the universe. Prayer changes things because it changes you. Pause here. Reflect on this. Fernando had prayed before. Oh, how he had prayed! He had spent 3 years begging God to pay his debts. He had beseeched the heavens to bring his wife back. He had bargained, pleaded, and wept. But nothing had changed. Why? Because he was praying from the consciousness of a victim. He was telling God how big his problems were, instead of telling his problems how big God is. He was trying to use prayer to change the mirror without changing the face he was presenting to it. As he read on, the teaching of the golden key began to penetrate his understanding. The book taught that there is only one cause. If God is the only power, if God is all good and God is the only power, then this debt, this fear, this loneliness, they have no power of their own. They are parasites living on his own fear. That night, Fernando stopped begging. He began the work of scientific prayer. This is not a religious ritual, it is a mental engineering. It is the systematic replacement of the thought of lack with the thought of substance. He closed his eyes and performed a mental treatment. He said to himself, I stopped thinking about the debt. I stopped thinking about the creditors. I turn the golden key. I think only of God. God is infinite life. God is boundless supply. God is the very breath I breathe. Can God be in debt? No. Can God be afraid? No. I am the expression of God, therefore I cannot be in debt, and I cannot be afraid. This condition is a lie, and I refuse to believe it any longer. He did not deny the existence of the bills on the table. He denied their power to hurt him. He denied their spiritual reality. Something happened. It was not an earthquake. It was not a thunderclap. It was the peace that passeth understanding. For the first time in 3 years, the knot in his stomach loosened. This is the sign, my friends. Emmet Fox taught us that the demonstration is made the moment the fear goes. The outer manifestation may take time to appear, but the spiritual work is done when the peace arrives. Fernando went to sleep that night not as a bankrupt failure, but as a prince of the kingdom. The next morning, the world tried to pull him back. The phone rang. It was the collection agency. The old Fernando would have let it ring, trembling, but the man who woke up that morning was different. He had touched the hem of the garment of truth. He answered the phone. He spoke to the agent. He did not lie. He did not make excuses. He did not cry. He simply said, "I am aware of the obligation. I am reorganizing my affairs. You will be paid. I require 2 more weeks." There was a silence on the other end. The creditor, accustomed to screaming or sobbing, was disarmed by the vibration of absolute calm. When you speak from the Christ mind, the world must listen. The creditor agreed, a 2-week extension. Fernando realized that he could not sit at home waiting for gold to drop from the ceiling. Treatment must be followed by right action. God feeds the sparrows, yes, but he does not throw the worms into the nest. The sparrow must fly. He walked into the city. He met Roberto, a former associate. Fernando had avoided Roberto for months out of shame. The shame of the fallen, big shot. But shame is just pride in reverse. Fernando had dropped his pride when he picked up his faith. He approached Roberto with dignity. "I am starting over," he said. "I need work." Roberto, sensing the new energy in his old friend, a lack of desperation, offered him a small remodeling job. It was humble work. It paid little. But Fernando accepted it as if it were a royal commission. Here is the secret of the mental equivalent. Fernando did not say, "I am too good for this." He said, "This work is God in action." He made every hammer stroke a prayer. He blessed the wood. He blessed the paint. He blessed the client who would live there. He was building more than a room. He was rebuilding his consciousness. He was constructing a new dwelling place in his mind, a mansion of faith. Fox taught that what you think upon grows. Fernando thought upon excellence. He thought upon service. And as he worked, the fear of scarcity began to atrophy from lack of nourishment. His work was flawless. Roberto noticed. Clients noticed. The vibration of success attracts success. Small jobs became larger jobs. The flow of supply began to trickle. It was not a flood yet, but the blockage had been cleared. 6 months passed. Fernando was faithful in the little things. He paid off the small debts. He sent money to Guadeloupe. But the great mountain remained. The primary lenders, the hard men, held a note for $150,000, and their patience had expired. The ultimatum came on a Tuesday. Pay in full in 2 weeks or face the consequences. Legal action. Seizure of assets. Public humiliation. The terror tried to return. The old man, the carnal mind, whispered, "See, it didn't work. You fooled yourself. You are ruined. This was the test. You will always be tested. You cannot claim to have faith if you have never had to use it when the sky is falling." Fernando went to his secret place. He did not cower. He stood his ground spiritually. He remembered the words of the psalmist, "I will say of the Lord, He is my refuge and my fortress, my God. In Him will I trust." He performed the deepest treatment of his life. He looked a debt of 150,000 and he said, "You are a zero. You are nothing. You have no substance. God is infinite supply. There is no shortage in the divine mind, and there can be no shortage in my life. I am a channel for the wealth of the universe. It is here now. I claim it. I accept it. It is done." He sat in the silence until he felt the click, the internal knowing that the prayer had been answered. He did not know how. He just knew it was so. 2 days later the phone rang. It was Guadeloupe. Her voice was trembling, not with fear, but with a strange hysteria. "Fernando," she said, "you won't believe this. I was looking through your mother's old Bible, the one she left for the children. Now, listen closely. The intellect will call this coincidence. The mystic calls it the bridge of incidents." Guadeloupe continued. "She used to buy lottery tickets every Christmas. She tucked one inside the Bible, right next to that book you're reading, the Sermon on the Mount. Fernando, I checked the numbers. It's over a year old, but it's a special holiday draw. It hasn't expired yet. The ticket was a winner, $100 million. The deadline to claim it was 5 days away." Fernando sat in silence. He did not scream. He did not jump. He closed his eyes and whispered, "Thank you, Father." You see, the supply had been there all along. It was sitting on a bookshelf for a year while he starved. Why hadn't he found it earlier? Because his consciousness wasn't ready. He had to build the mental equivalent of wealth before he could see the wealth that was already present. His mother's faith had planted the seed, but his own scientific prayer had watered the ground so the harvest could appear. He traveled to the capital to meet Guadeloupe. They claimed the prize. But as they sat in the office of the Lottery Commission, surrounded by lawyers and bankers, Fernando was the calmest person in the room. He told Guadeloupe, "This money is not the answer to our problems. It is the reflection of our answer. The answer was found in the silence of my room 3 months ago. This is just the shadow cast by the light of truth." His first act was to visit the lenders. the men who had threatened him. He walked in, not with vengeance, but with the grace of a man who knows who he is. He placed a check for the full amount, plus interest, on the desk. "Where did you get this?" the lender asked, suspicious. "Did you rob a bank?" Fernando smiled, a smile of genuine compassion. He reached into his bag and pulled out a brand new copy of the Sermon on the Mount. He placed it on top of the check. "God is my source," Fernando said. "And he is yours too, although you may not know it yet. Read this. It is worth more than the check." He walked out into the sunlight, a free man. But he was free long before he wrote the check. He was free the moment he realized that he was not a construction worker who had lost his company. He was a spiritual being who could never lose his good. He had learned the great lesson. You do not have to fight the darkness. You only have to turn on the light. Fernando had demonstrated the law. But the journey was far from over. For having money is one thing, possessing the wisdom to keep it and use it for God's work is another. The University of Divine Consciousness was yet to be born. The tests of the global recession were yet to come. But for now, Fernando stood on the rock of truth. He had proven that scientific prayer is not a gamble. It is a certainty. What about you? Are you sitting in an empty room? Are the creditors of fear and doubt banging on your door? Remember Fernando. Remember the book. Remember the law. The ticket to your freedom is likely within your reach right now, hidden in the very place you have forgotten to look, within your own consciousness. Build the mental equivalent. Change your mind, and you will change your world. This is only the beginning. Join us for the next chapter, where we discover that obtaining the blessing is only the first step. Stewarding the blessing is the true test of the soul. If this message has touched the spirit within you, like this video, subscribe to the channel. Help us spread the truth that sets men free. Peace be with you. We have arrived at the mountaintop. The valley of the shadow is behind us. The debt is paid. The miracle has occurred. But any student of the truth knows that the mountaintop is not a place to rest. It is a place to see further. There is a dangerous misconception in the minds of many seekers. They believe that once the big demonstration is made, once the money comes, or the healing occurs, or the partner appears, that the work is done. They believe they can hang up their spiritual tools and coast on the momentum of the miracle. This is the great error. This is where the ship, having navigated the storm, sinks in the calm waters because the captain fell asleep. We rejoin Fernando not in the desperate silence of an empty apartment, but in the spacious quiet of a new life. He possesses $100 million. The world calls him a lucky man. The world looks at the check and sees freedom. But Fernando, holding the consciousness of a mystic, looks at the check and sees responsibility. He knows what Emmet Fox taught so clearly: you do not own anything. You are merely the steward of God's estate. The first morning after the money cleared, Fernando woke up. The sun was the same. The coffee tasted the same. The face in the mirror was the same. He realized a profound truth that morning: money changes your conditions. But it does not change you. If you are a fearful person with $1, you will be a terrified person with $1 million. If you are empty inside while poor, you will be a hollow echo while rich. The old man, that carnal mind that whispers doubt, changed its tactic. It no longer whispered, "You will starve." It began to whisper, "You will lose it. They will take it from you. It's too much. You don't deserve it." Fernando recognized this voice. It was the same enemy, dressed in finer clothes. He knew that to keep this fortune, he had to grow a consciousness big enough to hold it. A small cup cannot hold the ocean. It will overflow and be crushed by the pressure. He had to expand his vessel. He began the practice of divine circulation. Fox taught that money is like blood in the body. It must flow to maintain life. If it stops, it causes coagulation and death. Fernando sat with Guadalupe, who was watching him closely, wondering if the money would turn him into the arrogant man he once was. "We will not hoard this," Fernando told her, his voice steady. "We will not build walls to keep people out. We will build tables to invite people in." They mapped out a plan based on spiritual principles. 10% for the tithe, honoring the source, 20% for the community, 30% for the family's security, and 40% for the creation of new good, investments that would employ, build, and expand. This was the birth of the Seeds of Faith foundation. But Fernando did not just write checks. That is the easy way, the way of the philanthropist who gives from a distance. Fernando gave from the trenches. He met with men who were where he had been. He looked into the eyes of bankrupt fathers and saw his own reflection. There is a story from this time that Fernando rarely shared publicly. He met a man named David, a factory owner whose business was crumbling. David came asking for a loan. Fernando sat him down. "I can give you the money," Fernando said. "But if I give you money without changing your mind, you will lose it in a year. Poverty is not an empty bank account. Poverty is a state of mind. I will give you the money only on one condition: you must study with me. You must learn to pray scientifically." David was insulted at first. He wanted cash, not a sermon. But he was desperate. For 6 months they met. Fernando taught him the golden key. He taught him to stop worshiping the problem and start worshiping the solution. He taught him that his factory was not a building of brick and mortar, but a spiritual idea of service. David's business didn't just survive, it thrived. He paid Fernando back within 2 years. Fernando was proving the law: give a man a fish, you feed him for a day, teach him to recognize his divinity, and he will feed the world. 5 years passed in this golden summer of harvest. Fernando's wealth grew. His reputation grew. He was featured in magazines. They called him the miracle millionaire. They analyzed his stock picks. They interviewed his accountants. They looked everywhere for the secret of his success except the one place where it actually existed: in his daily silence with God. And then the season changed. The law of rhythm states that the tide flows in and the tide flows out. The world economy began to tremble. It started as a whisper in the financial papers, then a rumble in the banks, and finally a roaring earthquake that shook the foundations of the global market. The Great Recession arrived. It was a psychological contagion. Fear, dark and heavy, swept across the globe like a plague. Banks collapsed. Fortunes evaporated overnight. The collective consciousness of humanity screamed one word: loss. Fernando was heavily invested. He had placed his capital in markets that were now free-falling. In a span of 3 weeks, the screens in his office turned a violent, unyielding red. His chief financial advisor, a man of charts and logic, called him in a panic. "Fernando, it's a bloodbath. You've lost 40%. It's going to 50. Sell everything. Cash out. Save what you can." A week later, the loss was 60%, then 70. $70 million of paper wealth. Gone. Vaporized into the ether of fear. The media, who had built him up, now turned on him. The headlines changed. "The miracle runs out. From lottery to loss." They speculated on his bankruptcy. They waited like vultures for the carcass of his fortune to appear. And what of Fernando? This was the test. It is easy to have faith when the sun is shining and the checkbook is full. But faith is like a muscle. It is only built through resistance. The old panic knocked on the door of his heart. It brought its friends insomnia, regret, and terror. He looked at the numbers. $70 million. The mind reeled. He thought of his children. He thought of the humiliation. He thought of the humiliation. "I have failed." The shadow whispered. "God gave it to you, and you lost it." Fernando felt the cold grip of anxiety tightening around his chest, a familiar sensation from the days of the empty apartment. He was standing on the precipice. But he stopped. He caught himself. He remembered who he was. He told his secretary, "Hold all calls. Do not disturb me." He went home. He walked into his study and locked the door. He did not look at the computer screens. He picked up the battered copy of the Sermon on the Mount. He turned to the chapter on the substance of things hoped for. He sat in the silence. He did not pray to get the money back. That is the prayer of the beggar. He prayed to regain his sanity. He prayed to realign his axis with the divine. He spoke into the empty room, his voice firm, cutting through the heavy atmosphere of fear. God is the only presence and the only power. God is not subject to the stock market. God is not moved by recessions. God is substance, changeless, eternal, infinite. I am a child of God. Can a child of God lose his inheritance? No, the symbol may change, but the substance remains. He closed his eyes and visualized the ocean. He saw the waves crashing. That was the market. Turbulent, noisy, violent. Then he went deeper, beneath the surface, down, down into the deep blue stillness where the water never moves, where the storm cannot reach. "I am here," he declared. "I am in the deep. I am anchored in truth." He performed a treatment for the world. He realized that the recession was not an economic problem. It was a crisis of faith. The world had put its trust in Mammon, and Mammon had failed. Fernando forgave the market. He forgave the bankers. He forgave himself for the momentary flicker of fear. "I deny the power of loss," he affirmed. "Nothing is lost in spirit. If it is not lost in spirit, it cannot be lost in my life. This is not a disaster, this is a rearrangement. The pieces are moving to form a greater picture. He sat there for 4 hours until the click happened. The fear vanished. The numbers on the screen were still red, but his internal screen was gold. He felt a strange, illogical sense of excitement. He felt the nudge of divine intuition. Fox taught that when you clear the channel of fear, God's ideas can flow through. And an idea came. It was crazy. It was contrary to every expert on television. It was the still small voice saying bye. The voice did not scream. It simply indicated. It pointed to sectors that were decimated: technology, housing, energy. The world saw ruins. The voice saw foundations. Fernando emerged from his study. He drove to his office. His advisor was pacing the floor, looking pale. "We need to sell the rest, Fernando." "Stop the bleeding," the advisor pleaded. Fernando sat at his desk. He looked calm, almost bored by the hysteria. "No," he said. "No," the advisor stammered. "No," Fernando repeated. "We are not selling, we are buying." The advisor stared at him as if he were insane. "Buying with what? We have 30% left. If the market drops another 10 points, you are finished. You are catching a falling knife." Fernando smiled. It was the smile of a man who sees the dawn while others are still cursing the dark. "The market is fear," Fernando said. "I am not buying the fear. I am buying the future. I am buying the restoration. God is expansion, not contraction. This storm will pass, and when it does, the structures that remain will be stronger than before. Execute the orders." He reallocated the remaining $30 million. He poured it into the very bottom of the market. He bought companies for pennies on the dollar. He invested in ideas that the world had discarded. The news outlets mocked him. "The delusion of the lottery winner," they wrote, "throwing good money after bad." Fernando stopped reading the papers. He stopped watching the news. He lived in the 91st Psalm. "1,000 shall fall at thy side, and 10,000 at thy right hand, but it shall not come nigh thee." He focused entirely on the mental equivalent of abundance. He walked through his garden, giving thanks for the trees, for the air, for the ability to breathe. He practiced gratitude for the money he had, not the money he lost. He knew that gratitude is the magnetic force that draws the good to you. 6 months dragged on. The portfolio dipped further. He was down to his last reserves. The pressure was immense. But Fernando held the vision. He knew that the seed must die in the ground before it can bear fruit. He was in the tomb, waiting for the resurrection. And then the turn. It started slowly. A few green numbers. A stabilized report. The world began to exhale. Confidence trickled back. The companies Fernando had bought, those rejected stones, began to rise. They were the leaders of the new economy. Because he had bought them at the bottom, his leverage was massive. 1 year later, the market had recovered 50%. 18 months later, it had recovered fully. 2 years later, a bull market of historic proportions began. Fernando's portfolio did not just recover. Because he had bought when the world was selling, because he had acted from faith when others acted from terror, his wealth compounded exponentially. The 30 million became 60. The 60 became 100. The 100 became 200. He had not just survived the crash, he had doubled his fortune during it. The phone rang. It was the same financial magazines. Now they wanted to put him on the cover for a different reason. The Oracle, they called him. The investor with the golden gut. They wanted to know his algorithm. They wanted his data models. Fernando declined the interviews. He knew they wouldn't print the truth. They wouldn't understand if he told them. My algorithm was the Lord's Prayer. My data model was the omnipresence of God. He sat with Guadalupe on the terrace of their home, looking out over the city lights. The victory was sweet, but not because of the money. The money was just numbers, digits on a server. The victory was that he had faced the dragon of lack a second time, a dragon that breathed the fire of a global collapse, and he had not blinked. He had proven that security does not come from the economy. It does not come from the government. It does not come from the bank. Security is a spiritual activity. It is the knowledge that you are one with the source. "You know," Fernando said to his wife, "I realized something today. I didn't double the money because I was smart. I doubled it because I was obedient. I listened to the silence when everyone was listening to the noise." Guadalupe took his hand. "You passed the test, Nando. You realize that you are not the owner. You are the manager. And the manager trusts the owner to provide the resources." This phase of his life solidified his understanding of stewardship. He realized that wealth is dangerous only when you think it is yours. When you know it belongs to God, and you are merely the channel for its distribution, the fear of loss vanishes. You cannot lose what you never really possessed. You can only lose your connection to the source, and that connection is maintained by prayer. He returned to his foundation with a new vigor. He told the board of directors, "We are going to expand. We are going to teach this principle. The world is full of people who are trying to change their reflection in the mirror by scrubbing the glass. We must teach them to change the face." He began to write down his thoughts. Notes on napkins, journals filled with meditations. The insights were coming too fast to keep to himself. He saw that the principles that saved his finances could save a marriage, could heal a body, could restore a nation. He looked at the Seeds of Faith foundation and realized it was too small. It was doing good work, yes, giving fish to the hungry. But the call was deeper now. The call was to teach fishing. The call was to create a school, a university, a lighthouse that would stand for generations. But that is the harvest of the seeds he was planting now. For this moment, Fernando stood as a living testimony to the law of non-resistance. He had agreed with his adversary quickly. He had not fought the recession, he had risen above it. He had not battled the darkness, he had simply turned up the light. And in doing so, he proved that when you seek first the kingdom of heaven, the consciousness of peace and absolute trust, all these things and more are added unto you. The storm had passed. The vessel was stronger, and the captain now knew that he could sail any sea, not because the sea was calm, but because his anchor was within the veil. As he closed his eyes that night, preparing for the next chapter of his mission, he whispered the words of Emmet Fox that had carried him through the fire. Fernando had found that love, and now he was ready to give it away. We now approach the summit of Fernando's journey. We have seen the law of mind work in the darkness of debt, and we have seen it stand firm in the hurricane of economic collapse. But if we were to stop the story here, we would miss the supreme lesson. We would leave Fernando as a wealthy man, a successful investor, a man who conquered his own fear. That is a great thing, certainly. But it is not the ultimate thing. Emmet Fox taught us that we are not here merely to demonstrate houses and automobiles and bank balances. We are here to demonstrate God. We are here to be transparency for the divine light. The purpose of the pipe is not just to hold water, it is to let the water flow through to the thirsty fields. If the water stops in the pipe, it becomes stagnant. If the blessing stops with you, it turns into pride and eventually decays. Fernando, now sitting in the quiet maturity of his years, felt a new hunger. It was not a hunger for more gain. The hunger for accumulation had vanished completely, burned away by the realization that he already possessed the kingdom. This was a hunger for distribution. He sat in his garden, the same garden where he had once walked to calm his nerves during the recession. Now he walked it to receive his orders. He realized that his experience, the lottery, the stewardship, the crisis, the victory, was not for him alone. It was a curriculum. He had been sent to the school of hard knocks so that he could graduate and build a school of a different kind. He remembered a line from Fox. What you have learned you must teach, not necessarily from a pulpit, but by the radiation of your life and the sharing of the truth. The vision came to him in a flash of intuition. It was a picture, clear and complete, of a campus, not a church, not a seminary, but a university of the soul, a place where the laws of mental science would be taught with the same rigor as physics or chemistry. He called it the University of Divine Consciousness. When he presented the idea to his advisors, they were skeptical. A school for prayer, they asked. In this modern age, people want coding boot camps. They want business degrees. Fernando smiled the smile of a man who sees the invisible. People are drowning in data, he said, but they are starving for wisdom. We have mastered the atom, but we have not mastered our own tempers. We have connected the globe, but we are disconnected from our own souls. This university will teach the only technology that truly matters, the technology of thought. He invested $30 million of his own capital. He did not ask for donations. He knew that to start a spiritual work on the vibration of begging is to doom it. He started it on the vibration of supply. The campus was built on the outskirts of the city, surrounded by nature. It was designed to be a power station. Every classroom was dedicated to a specific aspect of truth. There were courses on the law of cause and effect, mental chemistry, overcoming fear, and the 7-day mental diet. But this was not just theory. This was a laboratory. Fernando insisted that every student must have a project. They had to apply the scientific prayer to a real problem in their lives, a health condition, a broken relationship, a financial lack, and demonstrate a result. We do not want believers here, Fernando told the incoming class during the first convocation. We want demonstrators. A belief is a thought you hold in your mind. A conviction is a thought that holds you. We are here to move from belief to conviction. The university became a magnet. It attracted the most unlikely people. It wasn't just the religious types. It was the burnt-out executives, the anxious artists, the doctors who had realized that medicine could heal the body, but not the despair of the patient. There was Maria, a former CEO who had lost her way in the corporate rat race. She came to the university looking for peace. She learned the law of substitution, that you cannot fight a negative thought, you can only substitute a positive one. She graduated and started a consultancy that brought spiritual principles into boardrooms, teaching leaders that the bottom line depends on the top line, the high consciousness of the organization. There was Roberto. Yes, the same Roberto who had given Fernando a job when he was destitute. Roberto was now in his 60s. He enrolled as a student. He transformed his construction business into a ministry of service. His motto became, "We'll build houses, but God builds homes." Fernando watched this expansion with deep humility. He saw that he was just the match that had lit the fire. The fire was now burning on its own fuel. But the spirit is never stagnant. As the university thrived, Fernando felt a nudge to reach further. He looked at the younger generation, his own children, now adults, and their peers. He saw them glued to their screens, scrolling endlessly through social media, bombarded by the mass mind of comparison, envy, and digital anxiety. He realized that the message of Emmet Fox needed a translation. The truth was eternal, but the language needed to meet the modern ear. He sat down to write. He felt inadequate at first. I am a builder, he thought, not a writer. But then he remembered, I can do all things through the Christ which strengtheneth me. He wrote a series of books. The flagship title was Scientific Prayer in the Digital Age. In this book, he tackled the demons of the 21st century. He explained that the secret place of the Most High is portable. You can enter it on a subway train. You can enter it in the middle of a Twitter storm. He taught that a notification on your phone is a call to prayer, a reminder to affirm the truth. He wrote about digital fasting, not just turning off the phone, but turning off the intake of negative suggestions. He explained that the algorithm of social media is a mirror of the collective subconscious, and if you want to change your feed, you must change your frequency. The books exploded. They didn't just sell, they traveled. They found their way into the hands of people who would never step foot in a church. One story stands out. A young influencer named Sophia. She had millions of followers, but she was hollow inside. She lived for the likes. And when a scandal broke, a false accusation that ruined her reputation, she crashed. She ended up in a hospital, shattered by the judgment of the internet. Someone left Fernando's book on her bedside table. She picked it up, expecting a self-help cliché. Instead, she found the law. She read about the great golden key. She read that what others think of you is none of your business. What God thinks of you is the only thing that matters. Sophia applied the treatment. She stopped reading the comments. She started reading the eternal verities. She rebuilt her platform, but this time not as a monument to her ego, but as a channel for light. She started a movement of conscious creating, teaching millions of young people how to protect their mental atmosphere. Fernando received a letter from her. "You saved my life," she wrote. "You taught me that the internet is just a screen. I am the projector." Fernando read these letters with tears in his eyes. He saw the intricate web of divinity. His mother's faith had planted a seed in a Bible. That seed became a lottery ticket. That ticket became a fortune. That fortune became a university. That university became a book. That book saved a girl in a hospital room. That girl was now saving millions. It is the chain reaction of grace. 10 years after the founding of the university, and 20 years after his initial awakening, Fernando received an invitation. The International Association of Spiritual Teachers was presenting him with the Emmet Fox Award for Excellence. The ceremony was held in a grand hall filled with thousands of people from 80 nations. Leaders, thinkers, writers. As Fernando walked onto the stage, the applause was thunderous. But he raised his hand, gently asking for silence. He stood behind the podium. He looked older now. His hair was silver, his face lined with the maps of his journey. But his eyes, those eyes were young. They shone with the light of the eternal. He reached into his pocket. He didn't pull out a speech. He pulled out a small, tattered, leather-bound book, the same copy of the Sermon on the Mount he had found in the boxes 2 decades ago. The cover was falling off. The pages were yellowed and marked with tears and coffee stains. He held it up. "This," he said, his voice resonating with quiet power, "is the only award that matters. Because this book contains the map to the treasure." The audience leaned in. "I thought my problem was debt. I was wrong. I thought my problem was my wife leaving. I was wrong. I thought my problem was the economy. I was wrong. My problem was that I believed I was separate from God. I believed I was an orphan in a hostile universe, fighting for scraps. And the solution was not the lottery ticket. The lottery ticket was just a piece of paper. If I had found that ticket with my old consciousness, I would have lost the money in a year. I would have destroyed myself with it. The solution was the realization that I and the Father are one. When I realized that the debt had to vanish, the lack had to flee, because darkness cannot exist where the light is." He paused, looking at the faces in the crowd. "Emmet Fox taught us that prayer is not begging. Prayer is claiming. You do not beg the sun to shine, you step out of the shadows. You do not beg the electricity to light your lamp, you flip the switch. Scientific prayer is the flipping of the switch. Some of you are waiting for a miracle," he said, his voice dropping to a whisper that carried to the back of the room. "Stop waiting. The miracle is waiting for you. It is waiting for you to change your mind. It is waiting for you to build the mental equivalent of what you desire. Do not say, 'I will be happy when I get the money.' Say, 'I am the rich child of a rich father right now, and the money must follow.' Do not say, 'I will be peaceful when the war ends.' Be peaceful now, and your peace will help end the war. We are the architects of the world. If the world looks chaotic, it is because our minds are chaotic. If we want a new world, we must build a new mind." He lifted the book one last time. "This is the legacy, not the buildings, not the bank accounts, but the truth that sets you free." He walked off the stage. He did not revel in the applause. He went straight to Guadalupe, who was waiting in the wings. She took his hand. They walked out of the back exit, away from the cameras. "You did good, Nando," she said softly. "We did good," he corrected her. "We kept the channel open." They returned home. The house was quiet. Their children were grown out in the world, carrying the torch. Carlos was developing educational tech for children, teaching them meditation instead of medication. Maria was healing the sick. The cycle was continuing. Fernando went into his study. He sat at his desk. He opened the old book to the very last page. There was no more room for notes. The margins were filled with 20 years of scribblings, dates of prayers answered, names of people healed, scriptures that had come alive. He took his pen and found a small white space at the bottom of the final page. He wrote a note to the future, perhaps to his grandson, or to a stranger who might find this book in a box 50 years from now. He closed the book. He sat in the silence, performing his final treatment of the day. He did not ask for anything. He had nothing left to ask for. He simply bathed in the feeling of gratitude. He recognized that the goodness of God was not a passing event. It was a permanent state of being. He thought about the millions of people who were still asleep, still fighting their shadows. And he made a vow that as long as he had breath, he would be a lighthouse. He would stand on the rock and shine the light, showing them that the rocks they fear are only shadows, and the heaven they seek is already within them. The journey from bankruptcy to abundance was complete, but the journey of the soul is eternal. Fernando closed his eyes, and a smile touched his lips. He was no longer the man who owed money. He was no longer the man who owned money. He was simply a man who knew God. And that, my friends, is the only true fortune there is. If this story has touched something in you, if you feel the stirring of the giant within, do not let this moment pass. Do not just click to the next video. Stop. Close your eyes. Go to your own secret place. There is a check waiting for you. It is signed by the universe. The amount is all that the Father hath, but you must sign it with your own faith. You are the master of your fate. You are the captain of your soul. Build your mental equivalent. Peace be with you.